The First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. In the late 11th century, Europe was restless. In 1095, Pope Urban II called on Christians to reclaim Jerusalem and the Holy Land, then under Muslim control, and to aid the Byzantine Empire struggling against the Seljuk Turks. His speech at Clermont promised spiritual rewards, sins forgiven, for those who took up the cross. The response was overwhelming. Tens of thousands answered, from nobles to peasants. The first waves, known as the People's Crusade, were poorly armed and quickly destroyed in Anatolia. But the main armies, led by knights like Godfrey of Bearn and Bohemond of Taranto, pushed east. After a brutal campaign capturing Nicaea in 1097 and surviving near starvation and sieges at Hanch, they reached Jerusalem in 1099. The final assault was shocking. Crusaders stormed the city and massacred its Muslim and Jewish inhabitants. Reports describe thousands slaughtered in streets and holy sites. To them, it was divine victory. To others, a nightmare. A Christian kingdom was established with Jerusalem as its prize, defended by castles and knightly orders that soon emerged. The First Crusade was both unlikely and devastating. A rare success, it energized Europe, hardened Christian-Muslim divides, and set the pattern for centuries of holy wars that followed. The Second Crusade, 1147 to 1149. The spark came in 1144, when the Crusader stronghold of Edessa fell to Zengi, a skilled Muslim commander. The loss shocked Europe. It was the first major Christian-controlled city in the Holy Land to collapse. In response, Pope Eugenius III called a new crusade, backed and preached by Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most famous monks of the age. This time, it wasn't just knights and lords. Two crowned kings took the cross, Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. Expectations were sky-high, but the journey east was brutal. Conrad's army marched through Anatolia, where disease, hunger, and Seljuk attacks devastated his forces. Louis' troops fared little better, harried constantly across harsh terrain. By the time they reached the Levant, the two massive European hosts were shadows of their original size. Instead of targeting Edessa, the Crusaders and local forces turned toward Damascus, a key Muslim city. For a moment, success looked possible. They breached orchards outside the walls. But poor coordination, supply problems, and fierce resistance reversed the momentum. After only 4 days, the siege was abandoned in humiliation. The failure stunned Europe. It shattered the aura of Crusader invincibility earned in 1099, emboldened Muslim leaders like No ad-Din, and deepened distrust between Western Crusaders and their Byzantine allies. The Second Crusade ended not in glory, but in disunity and missed opportunity, foreshadowing greater struggles still to come. The Third Crusade, 1189 to 1192. It was born from disaster. In 1187, Saladin, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, crushed the Crusader army at Hattin and captured Jerusalem, shocking Christendom. In response, Pope Gregory VIII declared a new crusade, and no less than 3 major rulers took the cross: Emperor Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, King Philip II of France, and King Richard I of England, better known as Richard the Lionheart. It was a campaign of giants, but fate quickly struck. As Frederick led his massive force through Anatolia, he drowned crossing a river in 1190. Much of his army, demoralized, returned home. That left Philip and Richard. After capturing Acre in 1191, Philip fell ill and withdrew to France, leaving Richard in command against Saladin. The rivalry between the two leaders defined the crusade. At the Battle of Arsuf in September 1191, Richard's disciplined forces defeated Saladin in open battle, a rare Crusader field victory. Yet Jerusalem remained elusive. Richard advanced close to the Holy City twice but pulled back, wary of overextension and supply troubles. Campaigning dragged on until 1192, when both sides were exhausted. In the end, Richard and Saladin agreed to a truce. Jerusalem stayed under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims could enter freely, and Crusaders held a fortified strip along the coast. The Third Crusade failed to retake Jerusalem, but Richard's bold leadership and Saladin's resilience created legends that have echoed for centuries, two titans locked in a stalemate that shaped East and West for generations. The Fourth Crusade, 1202 to 1204. It began with good intentions but spun into disaster. Pope Innocent III called it in 1198 to retake Jerusalem through Egypt, but reality quickly crashed into the plan. The Crusaders contracted the Republic of Venice to build ships and transport an army far larger than the one that actually arrived. Unable to pay their enormous debt, they struck a deal with the Venetians, first to seize the Christian city of Zara on the Dalmatian coast in 1202. This already outraged the Pope, who excommunicated the Crusaders for attacking fellow Christians, but momentum carried on. Then came an even stranger twist. Byzantine princes in exile promised the Crusaders money and support if they restored them to their throne in Constantinople. In 1203, the Crusaders marched into the city and placed young Alexios IV as emperor. But when he struggled to keep promises of payment and reform, tensions turned violent. In April 1204, those tensions exploded into a full-scale assault. The sack of Constantinople was brutal. Crusaders looted palaces, burned churches, and carried off priceless relics, treasures like the famous bronze horses still viewed in Venice today. Thousands were killed, and one of Christianity's greatest capitals was left shattered. Instead of reaching Jerusalem, the Crusaders carved out a fragile Latin empire in Constantinople, while the Byzantine East never fully recovered. The Fourth Crusade deepened the schism between Catholic West and Orthodox East, leaving lasting bitterness that shaped Christian relations for centuries. The Fifth Crusade, 1217 to 1221. By the early 1200s, Crusader states in the Holy Land were weak and vulnerable. To strike back, Pope Innocent III planned a new strategy. Instead of going directly for Jerusalem, target Egypt, the power base of the Ayyubid dynasty. The logic was simple: control the Nile, and you cut Islamic supply lines in the region. The crusade launched in 1217 with armies from across Europe, including Hungarian and Austrian nobles, and later, the arrival of King Andrew II of Hungary and Duke Leopold VI of Austria. Their first campaigns in the Holy Land sputtered, but soon the focus shifted to Egypt. In 1218, the Crusaders laid siege to the fortress city of Damietta, a vital port on the Nile Delta. After a long and punishing siege, Damietta fell in 1219. Morale soared, and it looked like the path to Cairo, and possibly Jerusalem, was open. But victory quickly unraveled. The Crusaders pressed inland during the flood season, ignoring local advice and divided by infighting between papal legates and military leaders. Trapped by rising Nile waters and cut off from supplies, the starving army stalled near Cairo. In 1221, surrounded and desperate, they were forced into surrender. Damietta was handed back, and the army limped home in humiliation. The Fifth Crusade showed how bold strategy and early success could collapse under arrogance and poor leadership. It also set the stage for Frederick II's unusual approach a few years later, fighting not with swords, but with diplomacy. The Sixth Crusade, 1228 to 1229. It stands out as the most unconventional of them all. Its leader was Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most powerful rulers in Europe, but also one of the most controversial. He had already delayed joining earlier crusades, and when he finally set out in 1227, illness forced him to turn back. Pope Gregory IX, furious, excommunicated him before he even left again the following year. That meant Frederick embarked on a crusade while literally outside the church. Arriving in the Holy Land in 1228, Frederick tried a different tactic. Instead of leading massive assaults as his predecessors had done, he entered direct talks with Al-Kamil, the Ayyubid Sultan of Egypt, and Saladin's nephew. The timing was perfect. Al-Kamil faced threats on other fronts and preferred compromise to war. The result was staggering. In February 1229, the Treaty of Jaffa handed Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth back to Christian control, without a single pitched battle. Muslims retained access to their holy sites, including the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, while fortifications around Jerusalem remained limited. Frederick crowned himself King of Jerusalem, but the deal outraged the Pope, many knights, and clergy who felt negotiation had cheapened the crusading ideal. Within 15 years, Jerusalem was lost again, but for a brief moment, one man's diplomacy secured what years of bloodshed had failed to hold. The Sixth Crusade was living proof that even in the age of holy war, politics could outmaneuver swords. The Seventh Crusade, 1248 to 1254. By the mid-13th century, Muslim forces were regaining strength, and the Crusader states were once again under pressure. Enter King Louis IX of France, deeply pious, wealthy, and determined to restore Christian power in the Holy Land. In 1248, he launched the Seventh Crusade, convinced that Egypt was the key to controlling Jerusalem, just as earlier leaders had attempted. Louis assembled one of the largest Crusader armies yet, sailing first to Cyprus and then striking Egypt in 1249. His target was Damietta, the vital port on the Nile Delta. The city fell quickly, almost without resistance, an incredible early victory. But that triumph led to overconfidence. Instead of consolidating, Louis marched his army inland toward Cairo. The advance turned into a nightmare. The Nile's floodwaters bogged down the Crusaders, disease spread through the camp, and supplies dwindled. At the Battle of Mansoura in 1250, fierce Mamluk forces ambushed the army in the narrow streets, inflicting heavy losses. Soon afterward, the weakened Crusaders were surrounded at Feriska, cut off from retreat. Louis himself was captured, an unprecedented humiliation for a reigning European king. His release was bought only by surrendering Damietta and paying a massive ransom. The Seventh Crusade ended in disaster, crippling French prestige and showing how Egypt's geography and united Muslim resistance repeatedly doomed Crusader ambitions. Yet Louis's personal devotion earned him reverence in Europe. He would eventually be canonized as Saint Louis, though his holy zeal could not overcome strategic failure on foreign soil. The Eighth Crusade explained, 1270. Only 2 decades after his disastrous defeat in Egypt, King Louis IX of France launched yet another expedition, this time remembered as the Eighth Crusade. By 1270, Jerusalem had already fallen again, and Louis believed that striking at Muslim power in North Africa could open a new front to support the Holy Land. His chosen target, Tunisia, ruled by the Hafsid dynasty. Louis sailed with a large French fleet and landed near Carthage in July. Initially, morale was high, but what followed was swift catastrophe. The Crusaders lacked supplies, suffered in the blazing North African heat, and were soon ravaged by dysentery and plague. Within weeks, thousands were sick. On August 25, 1270, Louis himself died in camp. One of the most famous kings of Europe fell not in battle, but by disease. His son, the future Philip III, quickly negotiated peace with the Hafsids, collecting ransoms and securing safe withdrawal of the troops. The ambitious plan collapsed before it had truly begun. For Europe, the Eighth Crusade was a bitter epilogue. No great conquest, no holy triumph, only the death of a king who would later be canonized as Saint Louis. It highlighted both the weakening resolve of the crusading movement and the growing futility of distant expeditions. History remembered it less for military glory than for the tragic image of a monarch's crusading dream ending in the dust outside Tunis.